I don't need to tell this crowd what playas are, I'm sure. So I'll just kind of skim over this pretty quickly. But they are clay-lined basins that are typically at the lowest point of a self-contained watershed. And what makes these unique among other wetland types is that while there is a groundwater connection, there is no groundwater supply to the playa. So the playa actually supplies the groundwater to the aquifer. So there's only a one-way travel there for the water. Few theories on how these were formed. The predominant theory is that the playa basins were perennial lakes and marshes, and as they go through, those wetlands go through their drying and wet cycles, that vegetation dies, starts forming detritus on the bottom. Eventually you wind up, over around 8,000 years, you wind up with a dense clay layer, and that's what forms our little rainwater basins, if you're from Nebraska, but here we call them playas. It's been getting a lot of attention recently. A couple years before we started this program in 2015, certain outlets of the media started picking up on a lot of landowner complaints up in the Panhandle, specifically in the High Plains Water District, who has actually been extremely progressive and responsive to the needs of the landowners up there, relatively. And so we jumped on that bandwagon. A little bit about playas and their surface water. I know this is a groundwater conference. They do support a pretty good deal of biodiversity, which makes our hunters happy, which gives us more funding for conservation. So we've got a lot of species, just about everything that exists on the Panhandle in some way is tied back to and is reliant on our playa wetlands. And so that's why these species counts, although the text is very small, the numbers are very large. That essentially is listing all of the animals that exist in the Panhandle. Obviously, we have permanent fountains and cattle tanks now, but that is the gist here. And I know we don't have permission to play media, so I'm not going to play this. I don't even know if I'd have the ability to, but this is just one of our full playas with a bunch of northern pintail ducks on it. Oh, look at that. It does play. So this was one of our restored playas, Crosby County. I can't remember quite where this was, but we were pretty happy to see that. And this is about a year after we restored it, so they're loving it. All right, so moving on to the Ogallala Aquifer, which is kind of the foundation here of what we're talking about. There are there's research that has shown that these playa wetlands are the primary recharge source for the Ogallala Aquifer. About 95% of the water that flows into the aquifer comes from the playa wetlands. Texas does not have the only playa wetlands, but I'll show a table a little bit later that, true to our fashion, we actually have the largest and the most amount of playa wetlands. Wouldn't be right any other way. And recharge over these playa wetlands is about 10 to 1,000 times higher than over just regular upland, which makes sense since it's a wetland and the upland is typically dry. This is a very slow recharging aquifer. 22 to 25 millimeters per year is what the Water Development Board and our partners at Playa Lakes Joint Venture have estimated. There are some playas locally that have hit as much as 3 inches annually. High Plains Water District actually has some really interesting well data, especially on some of our landowners that participate in this program that have allowed sensors to be deployed. So that's kind of cool to watch. As you know, the Ogallala Aquifer is compartmentalized. So as opposed to some other aquifers, especially quickly recharging aquifers that we have in the state. The water movement horizontally underground is relatively limited in the Ogallala relative to the other aquifers. And so what we like to advertise to landowners, trying to get them to enroll in this program for our groundwater conservation, is that the majority of the water that you conserve, that you allow to go through your restored playa, the majority of it's going to stay within your land, because a lot of these landowners own 500 acres or more, with 3 or 4 wells, sometimes more. It depends on if they have pivot irrigation and things like that. But so this is a number that was actually created by, and I do not remember his name, at the Water Development Board, along with Playa Lakes Joint Venture. Do not hold me statistically to this number. This has not been statistically analyzed. These are rough estimates when we started this program. So roughly 3 inches of recharge in 1 year through a 4-acre playa, so a relatively small playa, especially across our landscape, produces about 326,000 gallons of water. And that's actually enough to support a family of 4 for 2 years on our average municipal water use numbers. That's just in the Panhandle alone. Again, these are not statistically supported. It has not even been analyzed yet. We are in the process of doing that, but so another thing that makes the Playa wetlands actually really unique is that the dry periods are just as important as the wet periods, if not even more. This is something we really try to get through to the landowners, is that you see your playas dry, and that is okay. And it's more than okay, it's beautiful. So we really like to see these cracks. Anytime we do a playa field day where the landowners come out and we demonstrate what participation in this program might look like, we always make sure to point out all of the cracks. That is exactly where that rainwater runoff is going to head towards when it does start raining again, like it is now. It hasn't rained in the Panhandle. It feels like 2 years, but it's raining now. And I have this. I'm not going to play that because it's rather long. So this is a schematic of, what is that, last animation, of how these playa wetlands actually go through the process of recharging this aquifer, and it all starts with the dry cycle. So we'll start out with a setting like this. Looks terrible. Everyone hates that they've signed up for our program. Now they have no water for their ducks, and their cattle have to, go back to the tank. It seems sad. It's beautiful. Those cracks open up and create large fissures. And while they are not directly connected to the aquifer, it gives that water a head start. And so there's really not too much chemical filtration. There's a lot of sediment filtration that happens in those first 6 to 12 inches. But after that, that water is still being filtered, especially as it penetrates that clay slowly. So there's our playa basin there. You can see our cracks. There's the rainwater runoff finally coming after, a 6-month drought. Started raining a couple weeks ago. The water runs through those cracks, and as that clay gets wet, it starts swelling, and those cracks swell shut. And that is the point at which playas will begin holding their surface water. When we get significant rain events, like we're getting now in some areas, the water will eventually run off the table and down along the edges. But again, that recharge rate on the outside of that playa basin is much, much lower. We really like to see those wide cracks. We like to see native vegetation that have the very, very long roots. The water will actually travel along those plant roots all the way down into the clay, the gravel layer, as it starts getting lower into the aquifer. And so that's what we're promoting here with our landowners. So, like I said, Texas has the most playas. Texas has the largest playas. The Playa Lake Joint Venture works with all of these states on managing their rainwater basins or their playa wetlands. But I'd like to say they do their best and their most work with us. So of these 23,000, we've got about 4,000 that are functional, which is great. We've got about 5,600 that are considered at risk, and around 13,000 that are considered not functional. So what makes a playa non-functional? These are the biggest threats that face the playas in the Panhandle today. These are pits and ditches. And it seems like it's too good to be true, too easy of a fix, and it's not. So 50, 60, 70 years ago, when this land was first inherited by a lot of our current landowners' great-great-grandparents, there were pits that were dug in the side of Playas. Here's all this really natural, basically a low spot that continues to flood. I can't farm it. I can't run cattle through it. It's too wet. So if I dig a ditch or if I dig a pit in the side of it, it will concentrate that water. And not only will I get water off that landscape so that I can either farm it or graze it, it now concentrates and supplies water to my cattle or my sheep or whatever I'm supporting there. And so those pits were widely used. Same thing with ditches. I will say, I don't know if TxDOT's anywhere in the room. I know you guys have really important work to do, but we're left with a lot of ditches that go straight through the playas. And so that's something we've dealt with as well, and we have a pretty good system recovering as much of that playa as we can. But today, nobody really uses those pits anymore. At the very least, the very most of their use, it is someone's grandson fishing in it, which is beautiful, but he could be fishing in an entire playa when it's wet. And so a lot of times these landowners don't even know that these pits exist on their playas. They're just, and especially in extreme rain events or in the month of September, when the rains come on pretty strongly, it gets all muddy anyways, and so they wind up losing those crops, or they wind up losing that grazing area anyways. It's just not a favorite spot of theirs, and so they're kind of, I'm not sure why I have this pit here, but I guess we can plug it. And so what we do, the Texas Playa Conservation Initiative, is we just plug the holes. And like I said, it seems too simple to be effective, but it actually is. And we've expanded this, but back in 2015, this is all we were doing, was acknowledging that these pits were an issue. And a lot of times when these pits were dug too, even 60, 70 years ago, the spoil that came out from digging the pit is left right there next to it, because that's the easiest, cheapest way to do that. And we can push it right back in. So some of it has compacted, but we've got a really good contractor that does really good work for us on the ground. So we do pit backfilling. We have now started, just in the last couple years, planting native grass buffers around playas as well to slow that water down, especially as our feedlots in the panhandle start expanding. We have some playas that are adjacent to some feedlots that we have wiped out the corn and replanted a lot of our native grasses for that filtration. And the way our program operates is Texas PCI, our program, pays 100% of the cost of the restoration, which sometimes is really low if we really are just pushing dirt back in the hole, and sometimes can be quite high, like if we're trying to redirect water so that we try to salvage as much of the playa as possible, cutting off a road, creating a ditch to, we have some specific instances, but most of the time, we wind up paying the landowner as an incentive. We wind up paying them more than the construction costs. And Texas Parks and Wildlife doesn't often get a chance to do that for our constituency. And so we love doing this program. The only string that comes attached to that is a 10-year agreement that you will not dig another pit. Most people, like I said, don't even know that they had pits on their playas, and so they're, of course, very agreeable to not digging another pit. But yeah, we do pay a one-time incentive payment. It's $80 an acre, and that's per playa basin acre. And so that winds up being quite a lot. So you can imagine if we're just plugging a hole on a really easy one, we've got 8 hours of contractor time. And if we're filling it on a 80-acre playa, which is not uncommon, we wind up paying the landowner quite a bit more. So this is what we've done so far. We have 74 restoration projects completed. I think as of today, there's a couple more. Construction basically came to a screeching halt when the rains came back, which we are not unhappy about. We got a little over 3,100 playa and saline lake acres restored and an equal amount of surrounding grassland buffer. There is no set amount. This is a question we get a lot. There is no set buffer distance that we recommend. The research just hasn't quite been done. We are hoping to throw some money at that soon, but we try to equal the Playa Basin acres to the total acreage of the buffer. That is not scientifically supported. We have a lot of work to do. This has only really been gaining momentum in the last 6 years or so. That's where we're at now. We are starting to partner with some universities, and we'll see where it goes from there. So, like I said, picking up momentum, 33 of those projects were actually completed in 2021. So we're picking up steam. We've received 3 now, NACA, the North American Wetland Conservation Act grants. And those have been small grants that we've matched with state dollars. And some private dollars as well. And so that has allowed us to continue to do this work and expand across several dozens of counties, actually. And so we have actually put a little over $208,000 directly into the pockets of our landowners in the Panhandle, which is a great thing, since a lot of times they can't really graze that pasture anyway. They've always been at a loss with that 20 to 40 acres or so, because it's always too wet, or it's too, you got cattle falling through clay holes and things. So we have an additional 200 acres in queue right now that we're just waiting for the rain to stop, basically, so that we can continue construction. And we have more people sign up just about every week. So that's fun for us. This is our landscape impact right now. I have the High Plains Water District outlined there. Within the High Plains Water District, about 55 of our Playa wetlands that we've restored, that's where they exist. So you can kind of see our county spread there. Yeah, that seems pretty up to date. So here's a cool picture. There in the back here, I don't think you can see a cursor, but there in the back there behind the large pivot circle is a playa that was not restored. And that landowner was basically waiting to hear how his neighbor liked working with us. And that's fine. A lot of our advertising is word of mouth, which I don't know if anyone's from the Panhandle. That's the best way to get information out. And then that playa right in front is a playa that we had recently restored. And this is right before a rain event. I think we got 3 inches of rain, maybe 4 inches of rain in one rain event. So more than enough to clog that clay, to make that clay start to swell up, and but not enough to really fill that entire basin. But yeah, so we really like that picture. It was kind of an accidental picture too. We were flying waterfowl surveys, and yeah, it's a beautiful thing. This is a playa, and it's not filled up yet, at least I haven't seen it recently. This is the Rita Blanca National Grasslands, right up next to the Kiowa National Grasslands in New Mexico, right against the border. And so we had the privilege of actually assisting the U.S. Forest Service in restoring the 9th playa in their 9 complex playa restoration complex, I've already said that word, that extended from Colorado, New Mexico, barely in Oklahoma, and then down into Texas. And so they had this huge swath of playa wetland and upland mix, and we had the privilege of filling that 9th. And so that one was one of the more expensive playas just because of its size. And I don't know if you can see on the picture, but it had several pits and one pretty large ditch. So it took quite a while to reconfigure that topography a little bit so that it made for a smooth basin. This is a little bit about our outreach that we do. We have about 4 playa field days a year, 2 additional stewarding our aquifer field days. 2 of them are groundwater specific, stewarding our aquifer. We work with Ogallala Commons quite a lot, which is a nonprofit based up in the Panhandle, focused on, obviously, Ogallala aquifer conservation and management. Back in 2018, if I'm remembering that correctly, we got a Conservation Wrangler Award from Texan by Nature. which fortunately got the attention of former First Lady Laura Bush, and she kind of took us on as a pet project and allowed us to use her face and likeness in our mailers, and she was very excited to do so, and so we're really thankful for that. That definitely got us a lot more attention from some of the landowners, which any burst of attention up there is great. Word of mouth just flows after that. We've also started attending livestock shows and rodeos with some things that the kids can put their hands on, clay getting dry and clay getting wet, things like that. And so that's been a good time. And this is kind of where we're moving forward now. So we've loved working with our landowners. That is going to continue for the foreseeable future. As we grow and we scale this program, we're now switching to a more municipal water target. And I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the Clovis, New Mexico story. This was where the city and the mayor itself decided to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and start trying to conserve their own water. As water wells were running dry, the aquifer started becoming contaminated under a lot of the livestock feedlots. And I know the dairy producers are experts at recycling their water now, but a lot of that contamination was also due to a lot of our older functioning dairy farms. And so basically what we did Texas Parks and Wildlife wasn't involved in this because this is before we got on the bandwagon. But Playa Lakes Joint Venture basically had their hydrologists and their hydrological modelers circle which playas would provide the biggest impact in their wells, in their municipal wells. And Clovis jumped right on board and restored those playas and protected them, essentially put them in an easement, although I'm not sure about the correct terminology on that, as I am not in New Mexico. Today in that range, they have about a little over 2,700 functional playa acres, which has added about 225 million gallons of recharge to their water bank, essentially. And that's about 15% of their municipal use in the city of Clovis, which is great. In the future, they are still, and the mayor has since his term has ended, but they are still participating in that playa restoration as more landowners sign on, as the city acquires more land, et cetera. And so here in about 10 years, I think was the estimate, that should jump to 23% of municipal use, which I know doesn't sound like a big jump, but it actually is, because that's taking into account economic and growth as well. So I recently had the privilege of presenting this to the Llano Estacado Regional Water Plan. It's the Region O Water Planning Board. And these are the numbers that us and Playa Lakes Joint Venture came up with to discuss with them. So in 2020, the municipal water demand was about 94,000 acre feet. Livestock water demand about 41,000. These are our estimated 2070 water demand numbers, 132 for municipal, 60,000. Obviously, it's going to jump pretty big. So that's our increase in each. But what I want to jump to here is kind of our larger scale modeling that we're doing now with our partners. So and I know you can't see the colors because it's a good distance away, but if all of the green playas are restored, which are either in public land or in landowner-friendly pastures, land parcels, if they are all restored, we'll gain a little over 15,000 acre feet, which is enough to meet the increased municipal demand in the region without Lubbock. Nobody can keep up with Lubbock. And in fact, Lubbock has their own plan that they're working with us on as well. But it's a little bit more targeted just because Lubbock is so special. If we started converting more of the red playas, so really expanded that, it would be enough to meet the increased livestock demand across the entire region. Not both, but it's quite a lot. So, and this is the last thing I want to point out. We have a really interesting tool that one of our GIS specialists made. The website's down there. It's just playaestimators.com. And you can pick anywhere. This is just the city of Silverton, who is also going to be working with us on allowing us to help them support their municipal water needs going forward using playas. And you can draw a radius around any point, and it will highlight the playas, tell you if they're functional or not, and exactly what recharge those playas supply now. To the aquifer. So it's been, a lot of our landowners are starting to use this, just kind of play around with the tool and send us questions, and so that's been really helpful. And that's it, that's all I have.